Can you comprehend the finality of those words? Not shouted in a fleeting rage, but delivered with a chilling, deliberate finality that has echoed in the chambers of my mind for over a decade. Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me before he physically ejected me into the teeth of an October gale and turned the deadbolt with a definitive click that severed my childhood. Get out of my house. I don't need a sick daughter. I was 15 years old. The inventory of my existence at that moment was pitifully brief. No coat, no cellular phone, no money, no ally within the walls I had just been banished from. Just a faded blue school backpack, its main compartment saturated with rain that had already seeped through my thin canvas sneakers, its contents limited to an Algebra 2 textbook, a binder filled with meticulously completed homework, and a single, half-eaten granola bar. 3 hours later, a county police officer would call him, and when the meaning of those official, dispassionate words fully registered, I am told his face drained of all color, becoming a mask of stark, bone-white shock. But by then, the trajectory of our lives had been irrevocably altered. The dam had broken, and the floodwaters of consequence were already surging, far too powerful to be contained. My name is Cher Walls. I am 28 years old as I write this, seated in the quiet, sunlit living room of my Boston apartment, watching autumn rain pattern a delicate, shifting mosaic against the window pane. There is a letter lying on my reclaimed oak kitchen table. The paper is flimsy, institutional. The handwriting upon it is spidery and unsteady, a stark testament to the trembling hand that composed it. After 13 years of absolute, unbroken silence, my father wishes to see me. The letter states he is dying. It claims he is sorry. There is a peculiar, almost cruel poetry to the fact that it is raining today. Precipitation, in all its forms, has always possessed the unconscious power to transport me back to that night. Not just to the memory, but to the visceral, physical sensation of it. The needle-sharp cold, the suffocating darkness, the deafening roar of the storm against a world that had suddenly gone silent and hostile. The date is etched into my personal history with the permanence of a tombstone engraving. October 14th, 2011. I remember the mundane normalcy of that Tuesday afternoon with crystalline clarity. I walked home from the bus stop, backpack slung over one shoulder, my mind pleasantly buzzing with the minor triumph of having aced an algebra test. My thoughts were the universal currency of teenage girls, the vague anticipation of whatever dinner might be, the light homework load awaiting me, the coveted band poster I planned to purchase with the last of my birthday money. It was a narrative of comfortable insignificance. I existed in a bubble of adolescent routine, utterly ignorant of the cataclysm brewing within the seemingly placid walls of my home. I had absolutely no premonition that in less than 2 hours I would be stumbling alone down the desolate, rain-lashed shoulder of State Route 9, my body shaking uncontrollably, my mind grappling with a primal, terrifying question: would I live to see the morning? The atmosphere within the house hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. It was a tangible entity, thick and charged, like the air seconds before a lightning strike. My father was not merely standing in the living room. He was planted there, a monument to incandescent fury. His face was a livid, mottled crimson. In one white-knuckled fist, he clutched a disordered wad of cash. In the other, 2 empty orange prescription bottles rattled a sinister percussion. He looked less like a man and more like a pressure cooker on the verge of explosive failure. My sister, Karen, stood positioned just behind his right shoulder, a stage manager ensuring her principal actor was correctly placed. At 19, 4 years my senior, she wore an expression of profound, soul-wrenching concern. Her brow was furrowed in worry, her lips parted in a perfect pantomime of heartbreak. She was the embodiment of the devoted, burdened older sister, shouldering the terrible discovery of her siblings' fall from grace. But I saw it. In a fleeting, unguarded instant as my eyes met hers, I caught the tiny, triumphant flicker in their depths, a spark of pure, unadulterated satisfaction before the mask of compassion slammed back down. Our stepmother, Jolene, completed the tragic tableau. She hovered in the kitchen doorway, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her lips compressed into a bloodless line. She offered no words, no intervention. This was her perfected specialty, a strategic, cowardly neutrality. She was a spectator to atrocity, her silence a form of tacit endorsement. My father did not allow me the simple dignity of setting down my backpack. "You thief!" he roared, the accusation exploding in the still air. "You little liar!" He hurled the charges at me like projectiles. Months of stealing from his wallet, a secret addiction funded by his missing cash, a stash of pills hidden in my room. He declared that Karen, ever vigilant, had uncovered the damning evidence. Cash stuffed in my dresser, pill bottles nestled in the back of my closet, text messages on a hidden phone that proved communication with local dealers. I attempted to form a defense, my voice a frail, stammering thing. "Dad, I've never touched your wallet. I don't know what those are." But the words withered and died in my throat as a horrifying realization dawned. He was not listening. His verdict had already been rendered, the sentence passed. Karen had spent the entire day as both prosecutor and star witness, feeding him a narrative of my corruption, each lie a carefully crafted brick in the wall now separating us. She interjected with a voice soaked in faux grief, telling him how hard she had tried to help me, to steer me right, how this confession was a last, desperate act of love. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a performance worthy of a standing ovation, and my father, her captive audience of one, swallowed every poisoned word. He crossed the room in 2 swift strides, his hand closing around my upper arm with a force that would later blossom into dark, fingerprint-shaped bruises. He dragged me toward the front door. My forgotten backpack was kicked toward me. "Take your garbage," he snarled, hurling it against my chest so hard I stumbled. Then he wrenched the door open. The scene beyond was a study in violence. Rain fell not in drops, but in sheer, relentless curtains. A low growl of thunder reverberated in the distance, and the temperature had plummeted, a bitter cold that spoke of the winter to come. My father turned to me one final time. His eyes, which had once held a flicker of warmth at my childhood antics, were now flat and empty. He repeated the phrase, each word a nail in the coffin of our relationship. "Get out of my house. I don't need a sick daughter." A final, brutal shove sent me staggering onto the waterlogged porch. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. The distinctive, metallic snick of the deadbolt engaging was the sound of my world locking me out. At 15, I was officially, terrifyingly homeless. I remained on that porch for what felt like an eternity, paralyzed not by the creeping cold, but by sheer, uncomprehending shock. Some childish part of my brain waited for the door to fly open again, for my father to emerge with tears in his eyes, to gather me into a hug and murmur, "My God, what was I thinking?" It was a terrible mistake. The door remained shut. The only sounds were the drumming rain and the frantic hammering of my own heart. My personal phone lay charging on my bedroom desk. I had been permitted to take nothing except what I physically carried. My backpack, now a sopping dead weight, contained textbooks, notes, and that lone granola bar, a pitiful arsenal for surviving a night in the elements. It was 2011. Payphones still existed in theory, but what teenager carried quarters? My allowance had been faithfully spent on music downloads and band posters. My priorities, in retrospect, were beautifully, tragically adolescent. A straight A student with exemplary academic survival skills and absolutely no instinct for physical self-preservation. So, I began to walk. There was no conscious decision, no weighing of options. My body, operating on a primal directive, simply turned and moved toward the only haven I could conceptualize, the home of my maternal grandmother, Dorothy Reeves. Her small, tidy house lay 7 miles away. 7 miles. In a climate-controlled car with a working radio, it is a brief, effortless commute. On foot, dressed in autumn jeans and soaked sneakers, battling a freezing downpour and a wind that sliced through cotton, it was a transcontinental trek across an alien, hostile landscape. Route 9 stretched before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt turned into a black mirror by the rain. Cars hissed past, their headlights cutting foggy swathes through the gloom, their drivers oblivious to the drenched, shivering figure trudging along the gravel shoulder. I was a ghost already, a peripheral blur they instinctively looked away from. The physical deterioration was a relentless, step-by-step process. After the first mile, my clothes were plastered to my skin. A second, colder skin that leached all warmth from my body. After the second mile, a deep, aching numbness had set into my fingers and toes. After the third, my entire frame was racked with violent, uncontrollable shivers, my teeth chattering with a force I feared would shatter them. Yet I walked. What alternative existed? To return and beg? His mind, fortified by Karen's lies, was an impregnable fortress. There was only forward, one hypothermic mechanical step after another. The insidious nature of hypothermia is that it seduces you into surrender. Your core temperature drops, and your body, in a last-ditch effort to preserve vital organs, begins to abandon its extremities. Your thinking becomes muddled, slow, and irrational. The desperate need to keep moving is gradually replaced by an overwhelming, soul-deep craving for rest. Just to sit down for a minute, the voice in your head coaxes. Just to close your eyes. It will be easier after a little rest. I managed 4 miles. My legs, feeling like waterlogged timber, finally buckled. Ahead, I could make out the dark shape of a mailbox on a post. A target. Just make it to the mailbox, I told myself. Lean against it. Catch your breath. Then you can go on. Grandma's is only 3 miles away. You can do 3 miles. My knees gave way before I reached it. The rough, wet gravel of the roadside rushed up to meet me, and then the world dissolved into a deep, silent, and profoundly welcoming darkness. 3 hours after ejecting his daughter into the storm, Raymond Walls's phone rang. The voice on the other end was devoid of empathy, crisp with professional detachment. It was Officer Daniels of the county police. There had been an incident. His daughter had been discovered unconscious on Route 9, suffering from advanced hypothermia. She was en route to County General Hospital. And, sir, there was a deliberate pause. Child Protective Services had been notified. A caseworker was already at the hospital. They had significant questions regarding why a 15-year-old girl was found walking alone in a dangerous storm without appropriate clothing or any means to call for help. His presence was required immediately, and he should bring any evidence supporting his actions. My father's face, witnesses reported, turned the color of parchment. They said he looked like a man watching the foundation of his life crack and dissolve in real time. Karen was beside him when he took that call, and in that moment, for the first time, the flawless facade she presented to the world slipped. Not much, just a fractional widening of the eyes, a slight tightening around the mouth, but it was a crack, and cracks, however small, have a way of letting in a blinding light. For the pivotal, life-altering detail of that night was this. The person who found me was not a random commuter. She was Gloria Hensley, 67 years old, recently retired after a 35-year career with Child Protective Services. She had dedicated her professional life to navigating the grim landscape of parental neglect and abuse. She knew every story, every excuse, every lie. When her headlights illuminated a small, crumpled form on the roadside, she recognized the tableau immediately. This was not an accident. This was an outcome. She possessed an emergency blanket in her trunk, a relic from her working days, and she wrapped me in it, called 911, and stayed. She followed the ambulance. She waited. She was a guardian angel with a pension and a keen, unforgiving eye for injustice. My father believed he was excising a problem that night. He thought he was restoring order, cutting out a corrupted element to protect the sanctity of his family. In reality, he had unknowingly lit the fuse on a powder keg of truth, and he was blissfully unaware of the shrapnel about to be unleashed. To understand the magnitude of the betrayal, we must journey further back to the original fracture that made our family vulnerable to such malice. My mother, Patricia, died in 2006 after a brutal, swift battle with cancer. I was 10, Karen was 14. Overnight, the sun around which our family orbited was extinguished. My father's grief did not manifest as tears or shared reminiscences. It was a total inward collapse. He became a ghost in his own home, going through the motions of work and domesticity, while his spirit seemed to retreat to some inaccessible inner bunker. The household, in its practical day-to-day functioning, simply began to decay around his stationary form in his recliner. Karen, at 14, stepped into the vacuum. She became the de facto adult, cooking meals, signing permission slips, ensuring I got to school, managing the calendar. My father, in his relief, anointed her. "What would I do without you, Karen? You're the glue holding this family together." His praise was constant, a lifeline he clung to. He never paused to ask how she was grieving, only thanked her for managing the grief of everyone else. In his profound, self-absorbed sorrow, my father cultivated two debilitating blind spots: his deteriorating recliner and his increasingly manipulative eldest daughter. What he failed to see, what he actively refused to acknowledge, was the quiet coup taking place. Karen wasn't just holding things together. She was methodically constructing a personal fiefdom where she reigned supreme. And in any kingdom, there must be a subject to control, a scapegoat to blame. That role was reserved for me. The campaign was insidious, a masterpiece of psychological warfare waged in plain sight. Homework I had completed would vanish. Permission slips for field trips never made it to my teachers. My favorite clothing items were repeatedly ruined in the laundry. Invitations to my birthday parties were never mailed. Phone messages from friends were forgotten. She built a shadow reputation for me, brick by invisible brick, by visiting my teachers with a face etched in sympathetic concern. "Sherry is just struggling so much since our mother died," she would sigh. "She's acting out at home. Please be patient with her." She painted a portrait of a fragile, troublesome girl, and because she was the mature, responsible one, the adults believed her. Once, I gathered my courage and confronted my father. I laid out the pattern of sabotage, the lies, the stolen opportunities. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You're just jealous of your sister," he concluded. "She's carrying this family. You should be grateful." That was the day I learned the futility of truth in a house built on lies. My strategy shifted from confrontation to mere survival. Stay small, stay quiet, endure until I could escape. 2 years after my mother's death, my father remarried. Jolene was pleasant, if somewhat distant, and tried to insert herself into our fractured dynamic. Karen's response was immediate and strategic. She began calling her mom. It was a power play, a move to solidify her position as the good, adaptable daughter. I could not do it. To me, it felt like a betrayal of my mother's memory. That refusal to perform familial alchemy marked me, in Jolene's eyes and my father's, as difficult, resentful, and unwilling to heal. An unspoken alliance formed between Karen and Jolene, a coalition of the pragmatic, and I was explicitly excluded from its membership. By the time I was 15, the household hierarchy was codified. Karen was the golden child, infallible and beloved. I was the problem child, a perpetual source of tension and disappointment. And then there was the complicating factor of money. Before her death, our mother, with foresight and love, had established modest trust funds for each of us, $45,000, accessible upon our 18th birthdays. It was not a fortune, but it was a launch pad, a tangible piece of her hope for our futures. Karen accessed hers in 2009. The money evaporated in under a year. A flashy car, designer wardrobes, bankrolling the dubious business ventures of her new boyfriend, Trent, a charismatic grifter with a smile as bright as his schemes were hollow. By the autumn of 2011, Karen was destitute, and Trent's promises were growing more desperate. My $45,000, however, remained intact, locked away until my 18th birthday in 2014. Unless, that is, something intervened. Our mother's trust contained a protective clause. If either beneficiary was declared legally incompetent or institutionalized before turning 21, control of the funds would pass to a court-appointed guardian, ideally a responsible family member. Karen and Trent deciphered the grim opportunity within this legal safeguard. If I could be framed for a severe institutionalizable offense like rampant drug addiction and theft, the courts would likely appoint my concerned, stable, older sister to manage my affairs and my money. Permanently. $45,000. That was the price tag Karen placed on my freedom, my reputation, and my future. It was the bounty for my destruction. The week before my exile, she executed her plan with cold precision. She made small, incremental withdrawals from my father's account using his ATM card. She handled all the bills and knew his PIN. She collected Trent's empty prescription bottles. She purchased a prepaid, untraceable burner phone and loaded it with fabricated text conversations. On the morning of October 14th, while I was eating cereal and mentally reviewing quadratic equations, she slipped into my room and planted the evidence. Cash in my dresser, pills in my closet, the burner phone's number scribbled on a slip of paper as a dealer's contact. Then, she presented my father with her tragic discovery. By the time I walked through the door that afternoon, the narrative was sealed. I was an addict and a thief. My protests were the predictable denials of a guilty child. My banishment was not a punishment. In his mind, it was a tragic necessity. That is how I came to be on Route 9, a human sacrifice to my sister's greed and my father's willful ignorance, walking toward the fading mirage of my grandmother's love. But Karen had made one critical, fatal miscalculation. She had not accounted for Gloria Hensley. My memory of the collapse is fragmentary. The harsh bite of gravel, a fleeting sense of surrender, and then an absolute velvety nothingness. Waking, however, is imprinted on my soul. The sterile glare of fluorescent lights, the astringent scent of hospital cleaner, the surprising comfort of a rough-woven blanket tucked tightly around me. I felt, for the first time in years, like something precious. And there was Gloria. She sat in a chair beside my bed, a woman with a kind face and silver hair in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked like everyone's ideal grandmother, but her eyes held a penetrating, assessing intelligence. She handed me a styrofoam cup. "Hospital coffee," she announced. "It's terrible, but it's warm." A laugh, rusty and unexpected, escaped my throat. She smiled in return, a smile that seemed to see straight through to my marrow. "There you are," she said softly. "Now, why don't you tell me why a 15-year-old girl was walking alone on Route 9 in a storm?" So I told her. I poured out the entire wretched story, the accusations, the planted evidence, the years of Karen's quiet warfare. I held nothing back because for the first time I was in the presence of an adult who was actually listening. When I finished, exhausted, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I believe you," she said, "and I'm going to help you prove it." Those 7 words were a lifeline thrown into a chasm I had been falling down for years. While I was unconscious, a machine of accountability had begun to turn. The hospital, legally mandated, contacted police and CPS. When my father and Karen arrived, expecting to retrieve a chastened and subdued girl, they instead walked into a conference room containing me, Gloria Hensley, a seasoned CPS investigator named Maria Santos, and a uniformed police officer. The power dynamic had inverted completely. Then, my grandmother arrived. Dorothy Reeves, 5 feet 2 inches of ferocious love, moved like a silver-haired force of nature down the hospital corridor. She entered the room and placed herself physically between my father and me. "That's my granddaughter," she declared to the assembled professionals. "What has this fool done now?" When my father began reciting Karen's accusations, Dorothy listened for precisely 30 seconds before silencing him with a raised hand. "Raymond," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "did you even ask her for her side of the story?" His stunned silence was all the answer she needed. Dorothy did not request, she demanded. She invoked a favor from a family court judge, and by 12:30 that same night, an emergency hearing was convened via conference call. By 1 a.m., I had a new home. Temporary emergency guardianship was granted to Dorothy Reeves. My father was ordered to have no contact with me pending a full investigation. CPS, led by Maria Santos, would be conducting a forensic examination of the evidence. As we left the hospital, my father made a feeble, reaching gesture toward me. Dorothy blocked him without breaking stride. "You don't get to touch her," she said, her voice like iron. "You don't get to talk to her. You had your chance to be her father and you threw it away, literally." She bundled me into her ancient Buick, cranked the heat, and wrapped another blanket around my shoulders. Through my tears, I whispered, "Grandma, I don't have anything. No clothes, nothing." She patted my hand, her eyes simultaneously fierce and soft. "Honey, you have me, and I have a Target card. Tomorrow, we shop. Tonight, you eat soup and sleep in a bed where no one will ever throw you out again." It was the beginning of my salvation. Dorothy's house operated on simple, solid principles. Breakfast at 8, homework before television, and no weighty discussions before her second cup of coffee. It was a sanctuary of predictable love. The investigation, however, was just beginning. Maria Santos was not a bureaucrat. She was a forensic accountant of human misery. She didn't accept evidence. She dissected its origins. The $800 in my dresser was traced to a single ATM withdrawal at 2:47 p.m. on October 14th. Bank security footage revealed the withdrawer. Karen, in her distinctive jacket, driving her recognizable white sedan with a dented bumper. My unshakable alibi? I was in 5th period chemistry, a fact confirmed by digital attendance logs and my teacher's recollection. The prescription bottles were traced to Trent Barlow. He had filed a police report for their theft, but not until October 17th, 3 days after, they were supposedly discovered in my room. The timeline was nonsensical, a glaring red flag. The burner phone was purchased at a convenience store on October 10th. Store footage showed a young woman matching Karen's description, paying in cash, with the same dented white sedan visible outside. Then Maria Santos delved deeper into our family's financial records. What she uncovered was a pattern of theft far more extensive than the $800. Over 2 years, nearly $18,000 had been siphoned from my father's accounts through forged checks. The funds funneled into accounts linked to Trent and his ventures. Karen hadn't just framed me. She had been systematically robbing our father to fund her boyfriend's lifestyle, and she needed a major distraction, a fall girl, before the scale of her theft was discovered.